wonder how I get rid of the echo.
I don't know. Is it?
I hear it. You don't hear it? Oh, it's gone.
I think when others mute, echo goes away. Mike, you're muted though.
Okay, well, I'll throw it open. Anyone wants to share anything? Or talk about anything?
George texted me last night. He sends his apologies, but he's on the road. He's not joining us today. Okay, I think since all our intellectual ones are not here yet. Formation of my question. I'm obviously being taught in measure some quantum stuff, quantum physics, which is just like, ooh. But in that, two points of practice is when I engage a new sound, new realm. Oh, phone tipped over. Got it strapped to a basket hanging here so I can have my hands loose. I can't even hear you chuckle because you're muted. So when I discover a new pattern, new sound, and so I'm in a spiral, which is the reason why I'm in a spiral, because the light is in the center of it and it moves around it. So, but what I'm trying to unpack is I see it both in heaven and earth, and they connect. It's like if you sound like the spiral, like a spring, and the larger end is up, and then it makes that hourglass shape when it connects. But I know they're two different, and they connect in the center. So I'm just putting that out there because I'm going, okay, I don't know why that is, that I'm encountering the reflection. But what's interesting in figuring it out is this chair that I'm sitting on. It's a Papazan chair, and I got this few days of this possession, but the chair is actually made on a spiral design. So I thought that was kind of like, I'm a very kinetic learner. So I'm going to throw that out there. I mean, it's not really a question, it's more of a formation. And then my other formation that I've been practicing for a few months. So in my garden, I am, which I say because that's all of them. It's just easier. They present themselves as energy, looking like a molecule, and they're always moving. And so one day Jesus was showing me a different way to enter in. And he goes, "What?" And he bursted his spirit. He bursted into particles and then went into the energy or the presence of the three. And I went, okay. And I just went, and then he showed me the difference is when you step in and you're individual, you go into it instead of becoming part of it. And I went, oh, okay. And so I related it to the, obviously when they were teaching the high priest how to go through the veil, I mean, there had been a little bit of instruction going on there, how you change your molecular design before you go whoosh. And so that's what, my brain, obviously I don't have understanding, but I'm still practicing. What's interesting, it took me a while to figure out how to burst my spirit so it was in, but still I'm practicing how to only word I can figure out is to absorb into them where I'm part of the one. So those are just practicings.
Yeah. Well, sounds interesting. I think when you see it from that perspective, the way that's engaged me is when I've been cognitive and needing to really experience something in a way that I can explain it or understand it. It's like I go into, and then seeing from a third person and seeing how things function. But when I actually am there in a more of a, this is who I am, spiritual identity, I am in him, in that way, it becomes much more of a non-cognitive, more of an absorbing, not just being in them, but also actually the way in which I actually receive something comes in a completely non-cognitive way, in a much more of a sort of almost osmosis, or something in which you're there and you become part of and you absorb sort of aspects of it when you're in. So I found the same thing. When I first started to engage certain things, I just couldn't, it was beyond my ability to understand it. Therefore, it created a frustration. Oh, I don't know what this is. But then as I learned to relax and not try and understand it and sort of just be, rather than I'm looking to do something here, like I'm trying to understand it, or when I was just being, then that's when it was like I became one with. And that was a completely different perspective. And I think that perspective more changed my relationship with God in the way that I knew him rather than I know him. I know him because I know all this stuff. Actually, I just know him because I'm part of him and I'm part of it. And I think the very first time that I sort of almost like disseminated out was I was in his garden and I was resting there and just learning to be. And I found all the particles of my being just being part of the whole of creation. And I'm just feeling the sense of creation and its joy, but also its loss, and I'm sort of part of it. And I mean, it was, very difficult to describe because it is, but you just explode outwards into being one with, and therefore you have, being one, you know things that you don't know. You experience things which give you a perspective that you couldn't see before. Everything becomes different. I know that the Bible says, creation is groaning, but I didn't know what it meant. And it was like being part of God and being part of creation. It was like I had a memory of what it was like before it was like this. And therefore I understood why it was groaning, because of the loss of its original intention, purpose in that way. And light, God being light and we being light, in a sense, light beings, the wave and the particle is the potential that when you're in them, all these things are possible, and then they become a reality when one of them becomes a particle and outworks. So you have this sort of, wave and particle quantum physics perspective that is like, I'm there and everything's possible, but then I've got to choose something. So then it manifests into a reality in that way. And the whole thing is energy and life, and I mean, it's amazing. And I think the quantum perspective of heaven and earth agreeing in that the macro and the micro are actual mirror images of the one. So everything which you can't see is expressed in something you can see. Therefore, the patterns of these things within God are therefore expressed in creation. So you have those spiral patterns, Fibonacci number sequences, phi, the golden mean, are expressed in so many different ways in creation in terms of fractal images and all sorts of amazing things, which are all part of God's being, who he is, and he expresses himself. And we see it when we engage it in God. you receive it in a different way that when you engage it in creation, because you see it at work rather than experiencing it being. And that's I can sort of try and describe it is ultimately God's desire is that heaven and earth, who he is and who we are and what creation is, are all designed to be reflections of one another, and in that way, which is really difficult to describe. But then when you start to see patterns in creation, and then you start to see sort of the geometric, sacred geometry type stuff, then it all starts to like, oh, I can see that, and it's like, oh, I've been there. I've been in that, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you from the inside that it looked like that. But now I'm looking from the outside, it's like, oh, I remember being part of that. And actually my sound and my frequency and my energy and who I am actually makes up the whole as well. So I am actually part of it, as well as being part of it in him. So there's this sort of transcendence and immanence that is difficult to describe. But actually quantum physics actually proves that God is outside of time and space, but also within it. So that's why he can be surprised within it, but know everything without outside of it. And actually that's how quantum physics describes how light functions. It's quite, it's a fascinating thing. When I was looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, that, and it does. I mean, they've proven it in a sense that you can be both outside of something and within it, and those two things actually in the moment, God's in the moment, but God's outside of the moment. And so it's really interesting when you sort of start to look at that. But I can see, the spirals and the different shapes and all those different things are sort of this grand design of the architect is actually something you can not just see, experience, but actually we are part of that grand design, and we are made up of some of that even within our own being. But
those things I've been practicing on, and some of the things that I assume are tied into it is that my traveling to and fro has increased.
Mm.
And the reason why I travel to and fro is because of life circumstances.
Mm.
So, so I try to tie those two things in together. I go, this is increased and you're teaching me this. So they have something to do with each other.
Mm.
Just like my birds just seem to are coming closer, my, wildlife, even sitting right by my door and like looking in at me. But I had one that, how they hit the window, and that's kind of like, and I held that bird to revive her for the longest time. It did not, but just teaching those things. So thank you because it's good to hear it just from somebody else's perspective, it just helps.
And it is like the more we are connected to being in God, the more creation responds to us, because it's seeing our sonship as the mirror image seen in God. And therefore the level of authority that our identity brings is much more when we're actually part of and involved in, and not just isolated from or observers. We're participating in the restoration of all things, and the answer in creation's grown, and bringing creation into freedom, because we're coming into freedom. And the more we see our freedom, and the more that is expressed in our connection to things which are somewhat esoteric and not just common. Actually, some of these things are like that in themselves. They're not something you can just say, oh, A plus B equals C. It's much more complicated, but also simple in you just have to be. I don't have to understand it all. I just have to be, and it will begin to function out of my being. Because creation responds to our being, not our doing.
That's a good word. Yeah.
It's had enough of our doing.
Yes.
But it's in its mess because of our doing, and now it wants us to be, and to bring it into an expression of freedom, because we are just being and not having to do. So all the DIY stuff has got it into the state it's in, which is in bondage to corruption and decay. And as we learn to be again in the identity that we were made, then actually that brings creation into that freedom of our glory, of our essence, if you like, of being, not having to do. And the more we do, the worse it gets. The more we're just being, the better it gets. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Mike, if I may,
okay.
Being and being conscious of, you talked about, being in his presence, and the other day with no sweats, being in dual, I get lost a lot of my thought, just trace back to where I am, and lose the conscious of being in heavenly. And so do you have any advice on how consciously keep on be able to, because I really want that 24/7 connection and being aware of I'm in heaven and not lose that connection. So would you have any good reminder, or how do I keep on that going, or expand that capacity to be able to?
Okay. Well, I think it is practicing being. It's like it's hard to say. Well, how can you practice being when you've got to just be? But you've got to be in that place where you rest and don't try and do, so that you can become more aware of the being. And I, if you're talking about engaging in dual realms and being in heaven and being on earth, then I'm only need to be cognitive when I need to be cognitive. Most of the time I don't need to, but my spirit is still functioning. And I practiced not, most of the exercises that people start with are stepping in and stepping out, stepping in and stepping out. But generally what they're saying is they're stepping in fully and stepping out fully. So it might not be their physical body, but their soul and spirit are stepping in, and then soul and spirit step out. Whereas what we have to practice is my soul and spirit step in and my spirit stays. And my soul steps out. So it's only my consciousness that steps out. And then all I have to do is learn to shift my consciousness at any point in time. And so therefore my consciousness has access to multiple different realms of where I can engage with God. It isn't just the heavenly realm in one sense. There's also the spiritual realms within me. There's the spiritual realms around me that I can shift my consciousness towards and engage. And so I practiced stepping in and then not stepping out, and then just shifting where my focus was. Then I could shift my focus to be here, and shift my focus to be there, and then shift my focus to be within my spirit, and then shift my focus to be, let's say, in one of my heavenly spheres, in terms of my family sphere, because it's not physically bounded by location. So I practice, well, what's going on with my son, or what's going on with my daughter, or what's going on in that realm? So how do I engage that? Well, because I shift my focus to where my spiritual boundaries are, and therefore I can engage. And the more you do it, the more you learn to tune in, so your senses become more sensitive to things that are going on in those realms. But when you are sensitive of, say, doing something here, then you are connected there, and what's going on there is flowing to here. And therefore, I practice that. Okay, I'm sat on my mountain, on my throne, in the realm of heaven, but I'm here, and I'm here thinking about this, whatever it might be. So now I'm going to draw from my throne in heaven to actually empower me or give me insight or whatever I need here to operate from the place where I'm seated in that realm. So I used to practice it, okay, and be sensitive. What's flowing? What am I getting a thought? Am I getting a feeling? Am I getting perception? Am I getting total revelation? What's flowing? And I would just, because when you practice, you're under no pressure because you're just learning. When you're actually having to live it, then you have to live it out. So I can't practice being sat here talking to you. I've got to function. Otherwise, I'll be here completely blank and not being able to draw anything out of heaven. Therefore, I'll be trying to dredge up some memory of something rather than coming from a revelation. So when you practice, you're doing it in a setting which doesn't have eternal consequences necessarily, but you're learning. And so I would just do that, particularly in situations where I would say, okay, how do I become sensitive of what is flowing out of heaven? And that was just when I was operating in one place at one time. When I then began to operate in multiple places at the same time, then I had to become aware of the multiple streams that were flowing, which increased my capacity at, no end. It really did. But it was just a matter initially of, okay, I'm going to think and focus. I'm sat on my throne in my mountain. I'm aware of what I'm doing there. I'm now there, and now I'm going to come back and be focused here, but I'm still going to draw from there. And I just kept doing it, until it became just instinctively a lifestyle, and now I don't practice it. I just live it, But because we've not been used to our senses really attuned to those type of things, sometimes it happens by sort of accident, if you like, and we're not aware of how it happens. Therefore, oh wow, and then it's like, oh, but how did I do that? And well, how do I do it again? And then you're just, well, it might happen, it might not happen. But if you actually focus on taking something that was good and then go back to it and then fine tune it, then you can then actually see it as, well, this is how I live, this is how I think. This is how I'm sensitive to this or that around me or whatever it is. So same thing would apply to, I want to engage the men in white linen. I want their support. Okay, so I'm going to focus on that then. Okay, I'm going to go to the court of the upright and I'm going to engage them, or I'm going to invite them to come around my throne. Maybe one or two particular ones that I have some affinity to, whatever. Now I'm going to step back into this realm in my consciousness, and I'm going to see what they release. Same with the seven spirits of God or anything like that. So I become, is it a sense of fragrance or frequency, or what am I receiving? Am I getting thoughts? Are they telling me stuff? Or are they just imparting something that just becomes, the background to my life, that there is a flow that comes out of the heavenly realm? It's just taking those things a bit at a time, learning to engage, and then just keep on doing it until it becomes so part of you, you don't have to think about it anymore. So, but I think what some people want is, well, I'm in heaven, I want to be conscious of it every single second. Well, if you're going to try and do that, then you can't be conscious of what you're doing here every single second. But in reality, you are still actually flowing from what you're doing in that realm. That's what we need to be sensitive to. And some people say, oh, well, I'm distracted. Well, the only reason you get distracted is you're not able to draw from that realm. So something has stopped the flow because either you're fearful or something is distracting the flow because it's operating out of the flesh, and sort of the negative side of that, rather than, my consciousness of just being aware of, I'm in the realm of heaven and therefore I'm always flowing out of it. And I only have to think about any of the places I'm in to do that. Now, I also practice being in multiple places at the same time by traveling in the spirit to some other time in space. So I would practice that. Okay, it's like, God, is there anywhere you want me to go? Any prayer you want me to answer? Anywhere in time or space, anywhere. Okay, I'm just available. Okay, where are we going? Well, I found myself traveling somewhere. So I'm in Russia or in China or somewhere in the past. And then I'm doing what I do, and then I come back. And I'm like, okay, so I made myself available and God used me. Therefore, I can learn how to begin to function, not because I just fancy doing something, but because I become more aware of those type of opportunities all the time, rather than just on a special occasion when I'm in a meeting or something and, hey, here's something which has opened up. So again, what I'm doing is saying, I value this. I'm putting a value on it. I'm setting the desire of my heart on it. And that desire will begin to be fulfilled as it's joined to his desire, because I'm heart to heart with him. And I am operating out of his desires, which are now my desires. So this cardiogenosis type of relationship where I'm heart to heart continually, and I'm flowing out of his heart, and therefore he doesn't have to say, oh, will you do this? It's like, I'm available, and therefore I'm doing that, sometimes consciously and sometimes not. And I don't have to be conscious of it to do it. You know, the main thing is that I do whatever it is that's on his desire of his heart. And sometimes when you become aware of it, yeah, it's great. You know, it's, oh yeah, I can remember doing this and did that and whatever. But actually, even if I don't remember it, I only need to remember it if I need to. You know, if I need to share it, or if I need to give someone encouragement, or that's the only reason. I don't want to share it just for the sake of sharing it because it's a good story, or actually it will make me appear good. Is actually, there's a reason for cognitive experiences and there's a reason for not cognitive experiences. And you just have to accept that that's the way it is. But I do believe the more we come into sonship, the more we can look through the four faces of God, and the more we will connect to what needs to be done, and the more we will actually then focus on doing it. Rather than just being available, we will see and we will be responding to what we see. I'm looking through the eyes of the eye and look at all this government that needs to be around my life, or look at all this, and I'm like, okay, now I'm actually connected to this, and I'm going to do something about that. You know, rather than sort of sitting back and hoping or waiting. Now I'm looking intently to see, and when I see, I can respond, you know, because I've chosen to see from a particular perspective. Now I can function from that perspective because that energizes me, and I now have insight into something I didn't have before. You know, and sometimes you feel, or I feel, there's a disconnect somewhere, and therefore when I go and look through the eyes of the lion or something, it's like, oh, whoa, look at all this chaos that's around. You know, and it might not be in me, but it might be around me, and it might be in family, or it might be in other people, and I'm like, or it might be my community, or my region, and there's something which is disturbing things. So I need to bring the government of God into that, because there needs to be order, because God is not an author of chaos. So if I notice chaos, then I can look to deal with chaos. But, you know, I'm just practicing like everyone else in a lot of these things, but I'm, you know, some of it I function in. And I want to function better because I want to become more aware. Mm-hmm. But it is definitely a practicing thing, tuning your senses to discern. You know, and all the exercises I used to do, I don't do any of those exercises anymore because I was then doing those exercises to learn to see, to learn to engage, or whatever. But now I'm engaging. So, you know, I don't need to do the exercise. I just actually am being that. Where I was learning to be that for quite a while in lots of different areas, and in some areas I'm still learning, you know. You know, and some of them I'm like really uncomfortable, and it's like, do I really want to learn this? You know, because now I'm going to be responsible once I've learned this. You know, so it's like, yeah. So, you know, because some of it's like, you know, ignorance is bliss in some areas, but actually we're not supposed to be ignorant. We're supposed to be having the knowledge of God because we have the mind of Christ. So once you do have some revelatory things, then you are responsible for what you do with it. You know? Now that shouldn't frighten us. It should just make us be aware that we are sons and we have a responsibility within the kingdom for various things that are part of our sonship, making sure we don't take on anyone else's, you know. And that's always a danger, comparing with someone else and therefore doing things because other people do them rather than they're just are part of our destiny, and therefore we know that that's something that we're involved with. But it doesn't mean sometimes I think about it before I say yes. Yeah, it's like, yeah, okay, yeah. And some of it is, you know, I know doing certain things will create some things in the natural realm which will cause me grief. But am I willing to, you know, suffer some things for the greater good? Well, yeah, sometimes you have to accept in doing things that God wants you to do. Sometimes people won't like it. Then you have to make sure your heart is right and you love them when they don't like it, even though they might be not very nice to you. You know, but that's all part of, you know, Jesus on the cross being able to say, Father, forgive them, you know, even when they didn't ask for it. Yeah, he was aware of the bigger picture, and he was aware of what he needed to model to us to demonstrate love, you know, because it all has to flow out of love.
Thank you. It's just, it feels like it takes a while, and I just the patience and just endurance and persevering is always.
Yeah, I mean, it does require patience. You know, we didn't learn to see, hear, and get where we are without going through the baby stage and the toddler stage and the preschool stage and the school stage and the college stage and the universities. I mean, all this stuff. There's seasons in life where you grow and you learn and you develop, and the same applies to spiritual things. You know, sometimes we need to have spiritual university. Sometimes it's like Dad's got us on his lap, speaking to us, reading us a book, you know, or sharing his heart with us, and actually it doesn't feel like we're learning at all. We're just enjoying his presence. But sometimes, you know, you have to enroll in something and learn how to do it. Just like you do in the natural world, the spiritual world is somewhat similar in that there are processes of learning which are different in different stages of life. You know, and you know, there's something called lifelong learning, which is something which is more about how we deal with life and use the situations in life to teach us and train us, and that applies spiritually as well as physically. You know, because I can remember engaging certain things in the realms of heaven at the time, thinking, what on earth was that about? And then later on seeing how significant that was in my actual growth and maturity. And then sometimes they're very directive. I remember in the early days talking to Jacob, and Jacob was very directive. You need to read this story in my life. You need to read this because this is going to be something really significant for you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And when I did, all of a sudden, I started reading it. It's just like, wow, I'd never seen this. I never saw this. I never saw this. And all of a sudden, it like changed my whole perspective, you know, because, you know, I didn't just get it by hanging out with him. And he didn't just tell me, he pointed me in the direction. And then in that direction, I discovered all these things that opened up. You know? And I think that happens quite a lot, you know, sometimes. It's like you do something and that opens something up. And other times it's great. I can just be there and things will happen without me seemingly to do anything, but something's happening. you know, underneath it all, you know, God's at work, something's happening. You know, I'm receiving spiritual truth, even though in my mind I have no idea about it yet. But eventually I catch up, because eventually, you know, things that you do in the spirit get released in this realm, and then you catch up with it and you sort of see it for what it was and what it is. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Your words just always encourage me. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, none of this is a short-term fix. It's relational, and therefore it takes time to develop the relational aspect of everything. You know, it in one sense, you know, the Matrix film was like, you know, well, let's plug in this program and I can do kung fu or instantly, but that's not real life. You know, yes, you can have a download from heaven sometimes, and yes, you can have a download when you read something in the realms of heaven, but then you know. But God, majority of the times, God wants us to do things in a relational way, because then we learn relationally and it grows through a relational perspective, not just a more functional organizational one. Okay. Well, anything else you want to share or talk about? All those who normally pipe in with stuff aren't here today, so we're sort of.
I like what we're talking about. This is good stuff.
It's good. Okay, anything else?
Can we go engage something? We haven't done that for a long time.
Yeah, we can do that if you like. That would be good.
Yes, that would be great.
What would you like to engage?
Woo, that's interesting. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you just what I went zing, like plugged into. Then we'll just start. We're already there. So in my practicing, my friend Laure was over in France this last week.
Yep.
And so I was really excited because I also have a call for there, but my body has not followed yet, but it's going just like it did England, because now my DNA is there, you know. And so she was there and I was really excited. And so in the focusing, because our hearts are connected, and I wanted to be there with her, right? And I wanted to see and engage that. And so I popped in, and that's what I use my little whiteboard drawing, because that helps me to be cognitive when I'm being kinetic. And so I'm drawing, go, okay, this is where I am, and it feels like this structure's here, and I start to unpack it, and here she is, and so I try to journal as much information, so that, because it's really affirming to say, okay, this is where I was, da, 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 and when you can put it together. So a few days later, she sent me a picture of the Eiffel Tower. And on her feet were all these geometric designs on the pavement. And so she just sent it over the, you know, like a message app. And so I wasn't talking to her. And so I go on Google to find out, well, where was she standing? Because I've had this experience and I love to figure it out. So I'm taking the Eiffel Tower, which I have been there in the spirit a few times before. And I start looking at all the places that visitors and stuff can stand. And I went, oh, and I came apart and I figured out where I was, but it was totally at a different end from her. And it was so cool and so affirming because I drew the platform and I was over by the fountains where there's these statues and I drew them, and I went, oh my gosh. And I go, well, if she was over here and I was over here, why were we at different sections? And then all of a sudden, you get because we were creating the arc that goes right through the Eiffel Tower. And that's so it's like, oh, that was so much fun to finally figure out where you were, right? So when we said, let's engage, and my spirit goes zink like this, all of a sudden, it's just like, okay, I was reminded of that arc, and then all of a sudden it felt like we were in the vehicle together, but the vehicle was responding like one of those, they're not a game, but they're interesting. And you touch, those balls you touch and you can see the electric wave go through it. So when we were in the vehicle, all of a sudden I saw all these electrical currents, but they were all arcs. It's like we stepped into all those arcs in the vehicle, the roundness, that lovely. I went, oh, now that's where I jumped in.
Yeah, that's excellent. And yeah, I mean, there's when there's things that are affirmed like that, it is very encouraging, isn't it?
Oh, yes it is. It is very encouraging. And in the past year and a half, it was kind of the transformation of the brain, because for the longest time I thought everything was spiritual.
Yeah.
And I was okay with that. And then all of a sudden I started realizing, well, no, some of these things are actual real places. And then I'm coming to the idea that most of them are real places.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
So why are we in this place? Why are we in a vehicle that actually should either be experiencing or going some, my dude just went, it just kicked in. It just kicked in. I'm busy. I'm going to draw a picture. Where are you, Dan? Where did you? Because they were there.
Okay. Right. Well, maybe we'll just do a little activation to just let's make ourselves available to be anywhere that God wants to send us, whether it be a place in time, space, or whatever. Let's just be open for anywhere He wants to take us, so that actually in that we can maybe, minister to someone in the spirit, or engage in something in time, or maybe just observe something, which I think would be really good, just to be able to, engage that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it's like in the realm of heaven, we can be available outside of time and space to be active anywhere. Anything that God is wanting us to do at this point of time, rather than just be here and try and go somewhere. Let's let him open up something that we can actually just go to and begin to experience, which I think would be good.
So it's interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
No, I was just agreeing. Go ahead.
So it's interesting. I'm sitting here drawing what I was experiencing, and while I'm drawing it, I go, oh, well, that's interesting. What looked like the the energy when I drew it. I just go, oh, this looks like the blood vessels of an eye. It's if you were in an eye and you saw all those blood, I go, That's the same thing.
All right. Awesome.
Yay.
Okay. Well. All right. Well, let's just engage. I've got some. Let's go and see where God might want to take us. I've got some music I can play in the background. Father, we just want to step into the realm of your presence, and we make ourselves available within you to access anywhere in time and space that you have a desire for us to engage or a need for us to fulfill. So we just make ourselves available to travel in the realm of the Spirit in time or space to outwork something within your kingdom purposes to bring glory to you and blessing to others.
So, Mike, did you want to do it individually? Did you want to do it together?
Just do it individually and see where God wants to take you individually, yeah. And then anyone watching this later can do their own activation and engage. So, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see where God wants to take you or each of us. Okay. Well, I had a very interesting encounter doing that. Something I hadn't particularly done before in that way.
So, Mike,
Yep.
it says, I was going to try to queue up my video again. It says that you disabled it, the host.
Oh, I just did that because basically...
So it's not distracting.
Yeah, because it was on you rather than... I didn't want you to be distracted by the fact that the video was on. It's on now, so yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
So yeah, I went to... I just engaged and asked the Father if there's anywhere he wanted to take me. So I went to the House of Discoveries. And in this discovery, I found a map. And so I received this map, and I came back out, And then I found myself in Africa, in somewhere in South Africa. I'm not sure what time it was, but I didn't think it was today in this time. And I went to this village, and the village looked pretty dry and sort of miserable. And so I called the elders, and they all came together, and I laid this map out, not as a physical map, but I drew it in the dirt. And I drew this map, and it was the map to a water source. And basically, and then also, not just was it a map to a water source, but how they could use their water to irrigate their land. So I drew this whole system of irrigation from this sort of map, where they discovered the water source and were able to use it to irrigate. I thought, wow, that's an interesting encounter. I've not actually done that before like that, so that was fun. I don't know if you had anything that you
Mike, can I just quickly, because it relates to water too. That's why I wanted to just kind of jump in and share, because I was just being, and as you taught me today, so I was just being the gate of the living water flowing, and my stream was not like really big, but it was just small, but still flowing into this area. And then I was sensing the animals and others, especially with the Christmas, the chirping sound outside. So I was hearing birds coming and all this creation gathering to drink from this water. And I've been engaging with a lot with the water element these days. So it was interesting that you said you gave them the water resource map, and I was also flowing this water to them, and they were like thirsty and they came to drink. So I just wanted to share that quickly. That's quite
well. Sometimes these things all tie up. You never quite know what's going to happen, but hey, it's God's knowing what He's doing, and yeah. So for me, it was like physical water, but actually, obviously, spiritual water is the real thing that God wants people to receive in the river of life. So, part of engaging them in physical is to unveil that there's a spiritual dimension that they can receive as well. So, awesome.
Fascinating. So I was up in the eye, God's eye, and then I looked down and I followed the beam and then just stepped in. I knew I was in a dry and arid land. I mean, I just wrote down Kuwait, but this is kind of interesting. So what I did, it's very similar to yours. So what I did is God had me move files from one side of a fence, a boundary, to the other side of the fence. And then when I moved the files, then all of a sudden I set up what to me looks like a cattle guard. That was the entrance, because then cattle or spiritual beasts can't walk across it, but man can. Then I saw myself, I went into the court of scribes and I picked up those already governed files, and I stepped over onto the mountain in the realm of this arid place I thought was Kuwait. And then I walked down the stairs and I took the map and the maps from the files, and I laid them on the land. And when I laid them on the land, I saw people walk to them like from different sides, like there were a window. And when they walked to them, they received the information and the revelation from what was governed and put on the land.
Awesome.
And they drank of it like it was a pool. So I just went, well, that's very similar to what Mike did. And
when you engage things, it's like they're always coming through us. So they come actually, even if we're doing sort of similar things or things which are related, they're actually all coming from each of our perspectives. And so it can appear different, but you resonate in that there's a connection in what God does when you do it, which is really cool. I think it's fun, and be interesting for those who maybe watch this later or when it gets released, who do the same exercise, that what they connect to, because they won't hear this until after they've done their engagement, of course. So if they do one, so it'll be fun for them to see how that might interact with what we've done and what he wants to do when they're engaging themselves, whenever they do that in the future. Awesome.
That's fun. Yay!
Yeah, good. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there. I've got to